Welcome back. I honestly could not have anticipated how relevant this build up into talking about celebrity culture would have been. Since my last episode, this whole situation around P. Diddy has really pulled focus. I want to start by saying, I by no means think it is funny. I take very seriously the opportunity to talk about celebrity culture. Last episode, I talked about it within the context and comparison of watching the Democratic National Convention at the same time that I was watching Love Island USA. Obviously, now this is a whole other spin and relationship to the topic, but I think at the core of it, if we can get to the core of it today, there's a really big and important conversation around power and around meaning, because I do think that they're related. As much as it is a horrendous tragedy how many people have suffered as a result of these power systems, I really welcome what is being brought to the surface, because I'm personally a believer that until we really know what's going on, we can't actually get to the work of healing it. So, as scary as it is and as hard as it is to face those shadows, it feels very important. And I'm just observing as more information comes out, and I anticipate that a lot more is going to come out, and that it's has the potential to fundamentally shift the way that we relate to popular culture, celebrity culture, and all of these people that we put on pedestals. I want to start by saying I am born and raised in Los Angeles, and so for anyone who's from LA, it's very likely that if you're born and raised here, you have some sort of proximity to celebrity culture. You probably have, at least at some point in your life, known someone who is famous or within a couple degrees separation of fame. And as a result of that, I personally have never felt I've never been someone who's really separated myself from famous people. I've never felt like, oh, they're better than me, or I think because I was just around it so much and it was just kind of so normalized, it never felt to me like I needed to play into it. And I have to say, that hasn't always sat well with people, because for some folks who are at that point of power, they might be using it to suppress or ignore some deep inadequacy wounds. And so when somebody comes along who is kind of confident in who they are as a human being and doesn't feel like they need to kind of worship the ground you walk on, it can cause tension. I've been in some interesting situations. I also know famous people who are incredibly grounded and warm and kind and generous. So this is not to blanket statement anyone or anything, as much as it is to give you some context to my point of entry into this conversation. If we're going to talk about how we have gotten to this point, right? Like, how did we get to the point where where so much enabling of violence has been able to take place in the shadows without people taking action? Like, when you're talking about sexual assault and sex trafficking and, potentially unaliving people, like when you're talking about the heavy hitters of shadow, it can be like, how the fuck did we get here? And I think it's obviously really easy to just pinpoint it on an evil person and say, like, Diddy's the devil and it's all Diddy. But we know better at this point. A lot of folks are really investing in learning about abolition and learning about, how to get to the root of an issue and understand structures and how they impact the way that we relate to one another and perpetuate cycles of violence. I'm personally a believer that the internal work we do creates external changes. I think for some folks that can feel really like not fast enough. But my belief system and my understanding and my goal and my intention is to look at the patterns and cycles of the earth and follow that wisdom. And when you're looking at those patterns and those cycles, things take time, and the gratification of change doesn't necessarily get to be experienced by the person who is, or the being that is, inciting that seed of change. We live in a highly individualistic reality right now as human beings. And so many of us feel this kind of like longing desire to be able to experience the benefits and to just be able to see the fruits of our labor. And that won't necessarily happen. Maybe that would be great. Here for that. But I do think that we're so skewed at this point to towards experiencing immediate gratification and being the ones who are directly going to benefit from our actions, that we maybe can undermine the reality of things take time. And a lot of my work that I do as an artist is centered around re-honoring and reaffirming feminine wisdom and power. The reason I do that is not on some like woo-woo shit, but because I actually believe to my core that patriarchy has so distorted our perception of what is powerful and what creates change that we often can't even notice or acknowledge or perceive the fact that we are falling into that same cycle again. So a lot of my art is around that, is around like, how do we begin to acknowledge the subtle works and those kind of unseen realm works as valid forms of power that actually do create necessary change, and how can investing in that bring us back to a state of balance in a spiritual level. And this is not a gendered thing at all, because masculine and feminine energies, at least the way I was taught, are not gendered. They're just energies, and we each have a kind of concoction mixture of those energies within us. Masculine energy is all about seen, what is physical, what is tangible. And we live so in this moment where that's so valued in comparison to the unseen that things do feel really out of balance. Like, why is it that I would argue most people believe having more followers, being more famous, being more seen means that your life is more important, means that you've had more of an impact? Really, why is that? In the cultures that I come from, feminine wisdom and the unknown and the realm of the unseen is of great power. And a lot of the magic and transformation is happening in that space, and it's so sacred. We protect and we honor what is unseen as sacred. It's not less powerful. If anything, it could be the opposite. Like, you have to have a certain level of spiritual clearance to understand and have access to certain things. Otherwise, it might be mistreated. And that's how I see feminine power. The ironic thing about that, or the interesting thing about that, is that the solution isn't to bring the feminine power, to bring that unseen into the light, because that would be doing the opposite, right? Like, it would be taking away that power. If anything, we can learn to honor it and respect it and have a wider vision of what success and meaning in our lives can look like. And as I'll always say, everything that I'm talking about is within me and around me. It's within you and around you. It's within us and around us, because we are all part of this same human mechanism that's operating in a lot of really unhealthy systems. So we're all a little bit sick in the head. It's just the truth. All that to say, when I think about celebrity culture and I think about our obsession with it, myself included, and when I think about all that's getting exposed now, right? It's like these things that have been in the shadows, that as it exists in the shadows, it sustains that power. And now we're removing it from the shadows and it's coming to the light and it's being exposed. And that power is being lessened and weakened, and we're being able to see it for what it is. And that, if anything, should prove my point about the unseen being incredibly powerful. So, what are the things that we are giving that protection? Are we giving it to things that are of worthy cause? Are we giving it to what's sacred, or are we giving it to fear? Because all of these power structures that allow for this type of abuse to continue are built on fear. There's so many different fears that it's built on. It's like the fear of not being good enough, and so trying to pour into something that you think will get you to a place to feeling better about who you are. You know, that kind of proximity to fame thing where you have to like earn it, and then you kind of become the toxicity that once you get to that point of power, and then it just continues and it's just insidious like that. You feel me? Like, what are we protecting? What are we keeping sacred? What is the things that are unknown and unseen should be things that are worthy of our protection, not people's secrets out of fear. And I want to be clear, I'm talking about on an energetic level right now. I'm not talking about people who maybe haven't spoken out against abuse that they've experienced out of fear, because that's different. I have complete compassion for that. And I think this moment is happening now as it is because there's enough people who've banded together to tactfully face a dragon. You know what I'm saying? Dragons are great. I don't even like that I said dragons, because I don't want to put like a bad name on dragons. But for the people who are playing into it, which is different, that is different. The people who are playing into it, who fell into the pattern, you know, by being groomed or whatever, of thinking that this was how that they were going to gain enough power to feel good about who they were in life, and to feel like, yeah, you know, it's all ego shit. But the people who kind of fell into that, they were feeding fear, they were feeding ego doubt, they were feeding insecurity, and all of that was being protected. All of that stuff was just building and energetically like growing and expanding, and it became this incredibly large web of crazy shit that's hard for me to even comprehend because it predates, you know, my life. But I'm really hopeful, as horrible as it sounds, I'm hopeful now because it is being exposed, and I'm hopeful because that gives an opportunity for us to really take a look and ask those inner questions, which is what I am here for. I am here to share how I am taking this information from the external world, grounding it, sifting through it in my own body, metabolizing it, and doing my best to alchemize it and turn it into something useful, like compost. What needs to die, and how can we use that to recycle life through the soil? It's the natural cycles of life. What I want to talk about, more than going into many conspiracy theories, which are all probably true, is what do we do with all of this as individuals? What are the questions that we can be asking ourselves as we witness what's happening in the world, to really start to shift in ourselves that toxicity that's built in us from birth, just by nature of growing up in these societies? Some of the questions I've been asking myself are around success, or around receiving attention or receiving notoriety. I need to ask myself and redefine constantly, like, what does it really mean for me to be successful, and why? What's my real goal here? Is it because I'm afraid of feeling like my life doesn't mean anything? Or is it because I genuinely want to have impact? And if so, what is the difference between impact and being celebrated? because there are a million and one ways to have impact. And some of the most generative, generous ways to have impact will never be seen. And if you're doing it to be seen, then there's something else in there inside of you potentially that feels like it has something to prove. But the reality is, no matter how famous you are, no matter how many millions of followers you have, there's still going to be someone who doesn't know who you are. And there's still going to be someone who doesn't like you. So if we're looking for all of this external validation to give meaning to our lives and to feel like we're worthy, that is fundamentally going to be an issue. And, you know, Donald Trump, for example, is an incredibly wounded person. Diddy is an incredibly wounded person. I'm not saying this to pardon them or to say that they shouldn't be held accountable for their actions. Absolutely. Accountability is one of the greatest acts of love. But it's just to say that now we're getting the opportunity to see what's really going on and stop glorifying that and repeating that pattern. I'm going to pull some tarot and see if there can be some like grounding guidance that I can offer to those of you who are watching this. Just because I'm aware that a lot of people are feeling really confused and hopeless and overwhelmed by everything that's going on. And I totally get it, you know, but I really do believe that there's always an opportunity for us to make magic out of chaos. There's always an opportunity for us to use the power that we do have, if we can recognize it, for good or for balance, however you want to say it. If you don't want to say for good, for balance, for harmony. But we can't do that if we're not actually aware of our power, and we'll never actually be aware of our power if we're so invested in these systems that are built on fear and people who actually feel deeply powerless and are fighting to create power from a harmful place, from a toxic place that only ends up hurting other people. It's like people who feel so powerless, and I've experienced this also in interpersonal relationships, the people who are the most insecure cause the most harm. That's a fact. The people who are insecure, the people who are the most insecure end up causing the most harm because they're not aware of the influence they actually have. Sometimes they are aware, which is even scarier. Sometimes people get intoxicated by that power once they feel it because it's being sourced from a place of pain, from a pain point, versus a place of like, wow, I'm connected to this magic that's so beyond my own body. How powerful, how amazing. What could I create from that? To me, I feel like there's a difference in those types of power, and one becomes abusive power and one is creative power. Abusive power, creative power. Both have impact, and we have access to that same raw energy at all times to do either, to create something or to abuse something, to destroy. When we're so disconnected from our own sources of power on a spiritual level, it's very easy for us to continue to just give our power away to leaders, celebrities, systems, jobs, capitalism, fear, pain, toxicity. It's so easy to give our power away to that because we're not actually aware of it and what it's doing. We don't know how to work with it. You know, when I used to talk about celebrity culture, it would be kind of like in a ha ha ha, fuck celebrity culture type way. But this shit is real and serious. And I think this has really exposed that, how serious and how real it is. And I really invite you to sit with that on a deep level. This isn't to say that moving forward, nobody receives attention for their gifts or their talents. This is to say that we have a responsibility to remember that every human being is important and has a life that matters and that has impact. Whether it's the person who is picking up the trash from outside of your house, delivering your mail, doing absolutely nothing, or singing a song that moves your spirit. Everybody came here for a reason. And this pedestalizing of people prevents us from creating ecosystems where we can work together to actually problem solve and create healthy environments for all of us to live in. Instead, we pit ourselves against one another and fight to be more and more seen and more famous and more acknowledged and recognized, all so that we can experience something that everyone deserves to experience, which is safety, love, security, connection. That's all anyone really wants. We all want the same fundamental things. But when we're trained to believe that you have to almost go through like a Hunger Games narrative in order to get that, it prevents us from remembering that it's our birthright and that we can work together to create that. So I don't know what comes next. I don't know what comes next in this conversation, but I hope that at the very least, if you're watching this, this has triggered some sort of like, oh, I need to go a little deeper with myself on what it is that I feel that I'm missing, that I need to pursue things that may not actually matter to me. And to start asking yourself, what are alternatives to a rich and fulfilling life? And can I just sit with that and play with that and imagine the possibility that it isn't what I was raised to believe I should be striving for? So having conversations with people you trust about identifying your core values, then starting to do the work of understanding like, oh, are the actions that I'm taking in alignment with that? And then from there opens up the opportunity of tapping into your joy and your senses and your pleasure again, and understanding what are my desires from a place that is healthy. I don't know how much I want to open this can of worms right now, but there is something to be said also for all of the relationship that this has to sex, because, and maybe that's something that needs to be not talked about, but it is something interesting to think about, is why is all of this stuff happening in secret, and what is the energy that's trying to be worked through that is happening in this secret way in order to protect something else, ego most likely. And I know that's, when people are talking about sexuality, especially among Black men, and, fear around that, there's so many layers to it. But I think ultimately people who want to feel something and who want to feel free and who want to feel liberated and empowered can sometimes do it in really fucked up ways because they don't know how to do that without feeling unsafe. And I think that that's another important question, like in a spiritually balanced world, we can integrate within ourselves light and shadow. So there doesn't have to be so much of these intense polarities between light and shadow out in the world. Like if I can learn how to hold the beauty and the ugly of me and not try to perfect myself and exist only and reject all of these other parts of myself, then I'm holding some of that inherent energy. Like we can't erase that, and either of those energies, they can't be erased. They just move around into different spaces. And so if we can each learn to be in balance and in harmony with those energies, that's how the balance is created, not by trying to eradicate it or ignore it or suppress it. That only makes it more powerful. So there's a lot of deep transformative inner work and shadow work that can help just move through some of these larger collective issues. And that includes making space for your anger and for your sadness and for your anxiety and for your fear and learning how to work with that and be supported by your loved ones through that and not project it, and learning how to actually work with the real material of who you are. It's a responsibility that we each carry, because otherwise we pass it on generation to generation without it being processed. And otherwise we aren't able to offer tools to our children and to the young ones in our lives about how to navigate it, about how to navigate the reality that this world is complex. The universe is complex. None of this is simple. And that's okay. It's okay if we're tapped into our power. If we're tapped into our power, then we know that we can handle difficult things. We know that we can, dodge and fight and protect if we need to. We know that we can transform it if we need to. But all of these things don't come when we're just trying to ignore it. One of the other questions that I'd like to ask is, what makes you feel safe to explore what's difficult? And what allows you to anchor and come back to your center when you've had to swing to an uncomfortable polarity for the sake of healing? Before I pull some tarot, I want to point out this book that I've been reading, Braiding Sweetgrass. And it's been really sweet. And almost every time I've opened it, it's made me cry. And I think that's because it is so tender in looking at the details of things and getting really present with all of the lessons that are materially around us in the natural world, and using that to reconnect. And it's been bringing up a lot of just sensitivity to realize how much everything is alive around us and how much it is so much bigger than our human experiences. I'm really, really, ironically enough, even though this was all about human nature and, human shit, I'm really big on decentering humans right now. And just, finding a way back to humility. It's let us look around and really remember what is going on here. We are just playing around with God's materials. And our time is borrowed and everything is borrowed. And we have to learn how to be humble to that and be in acceptance of that and find a heart opening in that so it doesn't feel so scary. Because I think sometimes the fear is I need to make myself more permanent because it's so scary that I am not permanent. And I get that. However, there's also a tremendous amount of love and sweetness that comes from knowing that we don't know everything. We don't necessarily know what happens. And even if you are an incredibly religious person and have belief systems, it still only carries you so far. There's only so much that we know. But that can be an entry point to feeling really connected to something greater. And if we allow ourselves to be in humility to that versus in fear of it. And this book has definitely helped me tap into that and just flush out some of those emotions. Go dance to your favorite song after this, because this has been heavy. Please. Honorable ancestors, spirit guides, masters, teachers, and loved ones. So what guidance and wisdom do you have for the collective to move through and alchemize some of this energy? What advice do you have at this time to help people ground in themselves and tap into their own power for the sake of larger, widespread collective healing? Now this is an interesting. So we have the Knight of Swords, the Nine of Pentacles, the Four of Pentacles, and at the bottom of the deck, the Hanged Man, which if you read my Substack, you know I was talking about the Hanged Man already on my last post. So lately when I've been pulling the Knight of Swords card, it's been talking about being determined. A lot of times it could talk about like being brash and a little bit too sharp. But in this case, I feel like there's this energy of determination to clear through what needs to be cleared through. That coupled with the Nine of Pentacles, which is about tending to your own garden, and the Four of Pentacles, which can be about creating stability, but it also can be about holding on too tightly. So to me, this feels like the invitation to loosen up your attachment to something that might feel like it's your security blanket, and call in that inner strength to clear away what is not, what doesn't really need to be there. And for the sake of putting yourself in a temporarily uncomfortable position so that you can ultimately find your way to a new and healthier space. And that feels incredibly relevant with everything we've talked about here, because ultimately something has to be sacrificed in order to move forward into a new way of existing. We're going to have to look closely at the ways of being that we're really attached to and be willing to let some shit go and be willing to be wrong and be in an uncomfortable position and make sacrifices. But the beautiful thing is that it's all in service of harvesting something much more beautiful and abundant. And the Nine of Pentacles really is about tending to your own garden. So this is internal work that we get to do here. And eventually that can feed into the collective as the Ten of Pentacles, which is more about like legacy and family and community. But for the time being, there's something really important about determination, discernment, figuring out also what's coming through is like figuring out what is sacred to you and offering that protection and seeing if you can kind of filter out the things that you no longer need to hold secret and sacred out of fear, and maybe replacing it with something else. Creating a practice around, oh, what is it that I'm afraid to speak of? And how can I remove that? Because by keeping it a secret, I'm holding it sacred. And how can I replace that with something I would actually like to be sacred? And just be in the dance of figuring out, how things change, you know? Like, I'm always inviting people to just try something different and see if they can derive some sense of excitement and power and connection to their own lives, and knowing that we can shift shit up whenever we want. So I feel like I want to pull just one more card. Any last messages for the collective who is watching here? Clear and simple terms, please. Okay, well, that was more than one, but the Ten of Pentacles came out, which is hilarious because I was just talking about that. So we have Judgment, the Nine of Swords, and the Ten of Pentacles. Judgment is the intense Plutonian transformation card. So that really just speaks to me of what we're experiencing right now. Like, things are changing, and I think that's beautiful. Like, this is an opportunity for us to have tremendous amounts of rebirth. What types of anxieties and fears does that bring up to you? This is exactly what I was just talking about. Like, what are you feeding your fear? What are you feeding your fear, really? And how can you offer that to the earth, to the soil, not in like a mean way, but in a regenerative way of, I'm okay with letting this die now in service of something new, to give it new life, to give it back to that raw energetic form in order to transform into something that can be beneficial to me and to my life and to my loved ones, and in service of the collective good, of the communities that we want to build, of the families that we want to build. What does harmony really look like once we've divested from all of the things that we think we're supposed to be wanting, once we've taken the time to compost some of the bullshit? What is the thing I get to dream of after that? So this just feels honestly like confirmation of what I was saying before. But then at the bottom of the deck, we also have Seven of Wands, which is kind of like a defensive, protective energy. So what are you willing to fight for? What really matters to you? And all of that will help us in the ongoing human journey of trying to find balance. And that is all I have for you today. What a journey. I knew this was going to be hard, and I was kind of avoiding it, and I'm proud of myself. We did it. We're here. We're done. Please let me know in the comments, like, what comes up for you. And as always, I have my Substack page. You can subscribe. My Substack is one way that you can keep in touch with me throughout the month. And there's also a backlog of tons of writings and ruminations, kind of similar to this one. I also do offer creative alchemy sessions, which I will be introducing tarot into those sessions. And the purpose of those sessions is to just help and guide you in your life, whether that be through a creative project or finding work-life balance. But we talk about some of these things and how to integrate with everything that's happening in the world in your personal life. And I'd help just kind of guide you through that. So all of that will be linked below, as will the book, as will the tarot deck. And I also on TikTok will be posting at some point another meditation, because I really liked the last one that I posted and it seemed to be helpful. So I really love to hear your feedback and to know what of this is helpful and useful and what resonates for you, because this really is just a pure offering from my heart, and it helps me to know what's working and what's not, so that we can continue to build and grow and evolve together. So thank you for being here, and I will catch you next month. Seriously, go dance to your favorite song. I'm not kidding. That is homework.